In this case, there were about 30 of those psychics. Hi, welcome to Kryminalny Patrol. In my opinion, this case should have ended differently. It should have simply been solved. In my opinion, a lot of mistakes were made and there was some kind of sluggishness, that's why. For now, unfortunately, that's how this case looks. It concerns a certain journalist from Łódź, Iwona Mogiła-Lisowska. I think some of you know about this case because it's already been talked about. Michał Fajbusiewicz also spoke about it, but today we'd like to talk about it from maybe a slightly different point of view. I invite you to watch the new episode.
Like Criminal Patrol? Support us by clicking the support button or the link in the video description. It's thanks to our supporters that we can create new videos. Thank you very much.
When Iwona was little, she lived in Wrocław. She was born exactly on August 22, 1961. So that family was the father, mother, and two sisters. One of the sisters required care because she had cerebral palsy. So they initially lived in Wrocław, and when Iwona was still little, they moved to Łódź and settled here on this street. Iwona was talented from a young age. She was gifted and she really learned quickly. Her father hoped she would become a doctor, but it turned out that Iwona was simply afraid of blood, so she had no chance as a doctor. It also turned out that she had various language abilities. She was interested in art, literature in general, and she also danced. So there were quite a lot of such things. So when they were in Łódź, they were already living there. She went to university, first studying Polish philology, and then she switched to cultural studies. Her studies went basically without any problems, and she also participated in social life. At one of those parties, she met Maciek, and I have to say, Maciek really swept her off her feet. He could actually be attractive on one hand as a man on the other hand. Even back then, he was a talented martial artist, skilled in Eastern martial arts. He trained karate, he trained jiu-jitsu, and on top of that, he also had a head for business. He thought that since he could fight, he could also teach, and he used that to open a karate school in Łódź. And that's exactly what happened. It was a well-known, thriving karate school, and on top of that, Maciek came from a family with connections, influential people. So it's no surprise that he really swept Iwona off her feet, and Iwona herself was also an attractive girl. A brunette with green eyes. They made, as everyone said back then, a great couple, beautiful people with a future ahead of them, because it was also the case that Iwona's father worked in foreign trade, and back then, in the 90s, foreign trade meant, of course, a lot of money. When they moved to Łódź, he continued to work in foreign trade. Meanwhile, her mother ran a fish shop and basically took care of her 3 daughters. Unfortunately, they got married quite soon after they met. Well, quite soon. It also turned out that Maciek was a completely different person. When they were alone behind closed doors, it turned out he was an aggressive man, prone to arguments and fighting, and that's exactly what he was, a so-called wife-beater. A man who also abused alcohol, drank a lot, and when he drank, he became aggressive. It happened more than once that Iwona was hit by him, not to mention all kinds of insults, name-calling, and similar things. Iwona endured it and she put up with it for a long time, probably also because her mother was raised with, I would say, traditional values. She didn't think that her daughter could get a divorce, so Iwona hid all of it. She somehow kept it inside. She didn't tell her mother about it, but in 1987 she simply divorced Maciek. It was a kind of secret. That only came out later in this matter, but in fact in 1987 they both got divorced, and their separation lasted about 2 years. After 2 years, Maciek tries again to get Iwona to forgive him. He was supposed to change, he was supposed to stop drinking, and indeed, Iwona decided that they would get back together. Practically everyone around thought that they were still married the whole time. Meanwhile, they were already divorced, and when they got back together, they didn't get married again, so in fact they were strangers to each other, which also matters in this case. Iwona keeps moving forward all the time. These are good years for her. She studies and learning comes easily to her. In addition, in 1992, an Italian producer started a new television channel in Łódź. That was something back then, Tele24. Iwona applies for a kind of audition for this channel, gets accepted and starts working as a journalist, as a reporter. With her appearance, beauty, demeanor, style and skills, all of this makes her a favorite among viewers, and let's call it, she builds a career. Her dreams of having a home also came true because she wants to have her own house, but she doesn't have money. Actually, her father is likely the one buying her that house. That house on Świetlików Street is a house that, on one hand, is in an attractive location because at that time it was on the outskirts of recreational areas, not far away. Areas where you can go for a run, get some fresh air. For people from the city, these are really very attractive areas. But on the other hand, that house required a huge amount of work and renovation. It took a lot of money and work to bring that house to the condition that Iwona dreamed of. As a result, she feels obligated. As for the fact that her dad basically bought her that house or gave most of the money, she felt she had to pay that money back, especially since the house is simply in her name. So she goes to Germany and works there, what they call working abroad. It was different at times. She started working somewhere, even for a farmer, but later on, as a result, I think her dad arranged something permanent for her. Basically, she started working in Mannheim in a place where she kept getting promoted. First, she was a waitress. Then she started handling accounting. And later, whenever she went away, she worked only at that one place in Mannheim. Slowly, Iwona is probably starting to get tired at this time because on one hand she's still studying and on the other hand she's starting to work at the Tele24 channel. And she goes to work in Germany. It's a lot of responsibilities. Maciek is basically in the newly bought house at that time. He's constantly supervising the workers, but she's starting to have enough. She says something about quitting those trips because it's too exhausting for her and she can't manage to handle it all somehow. It's November 10th, 1992. Her dad comes back from a business trip then. It was a trip to Yugoslavia, while that country still existed back then. He came to her house, they talked for a while. She told him about what still needed to be done in the house. He even brought her some champagne because she likes champagne. He gave her the bottle, they talked for a while, but her father said that since she still had so much work, he would try to help her somehow. The next day, even though it was the November 11th holiday, he would come and they would try to do something in the house together. They agreed on that and have been independent since that day because it was like this. When they had workers in the house, Mom, the one who ran the fish shop, would cook lunches for those workers. So in the afternoon, around 4 o'clock post-meridium, they went to Mom's place again. And here there's a kind of, I would say, inconsistency that Mom noticed, because usually it was like this. They would come to the shop, take the keys to the apartment, go to the apartment, pick up the lunch, and deliver it to the workers. But that day, Maciek got out of the car. Iwona was sitting inside. She didn't get out. She didn't approach the parents. She didn't go into the shop. She didn't talk. Maciek just took the keys. And when they drove away, Iwona didn't even look. She didn't wave to her mom like she usually did. And her mom sensed that this was some strange behavior, that probably Maciek and Iwona had just had an argument, that she wasn't in the mood. That's why I would say she acted so abruptly, and that's why she didn't get out of the car. It was also the case that they had simply made plans for that day. They were supposed to come to her parents' house that evening, which means they were supposed to come on November 10th. Her father was supposed to talk about the trip. They were supposed to plan the work, but they didn't come. In the end, her parents decided there must have been a problem or argument between them. Since they didn't come, they probably didn't want to. They weren't in the mood. They felt a bit sad, but on the other hand, they understood that these things happen. On November 11th, just as her father promised, he is at Iwona's apartment early in the morning. But Iwona isn't there. Instead, Maciek is lying on the couch, wearing his kimono, his black one that he uses for training. The father starts asking what's going on with Iwona, and Maciek says, well, she didn't come back, she went to work, she didn't come back, but he says, there's nothing strange about that either, because it really did happen sometimes that Iwona was suddenly sent out somewhere, that she had to do some material. Because of that, she would come back late or sometimes not until the next day. Well, her father was a bit surprised because they had agreed to do some work at home, but he figured that maybe that's just how it was. He sat down for a while and waited, but Iwona didn't come back, so he left and returned to his own home on Mogiła Street because that's where he lived with his wife. The hours keep passing. Maciek calls them in the evening and says over the phone that he found Iwona's letter, that according to this letter, Iwona, she went to Germany to work, specifically at the cafe where she usually worked. He was so shaken, nervous, because she hadn't told him anything before, so the next day the parents already knew that she had supposedly left. On the 12th, which is the next day, they come to the apartment. Maciek is upset, nervous, saying something about what's the point of having a wife if she just leaves and he can't agree on anything with her. Well, the parents will be really surprised because they had a very good relationship with her. Iwona always told them whenever she was going somewhere. Her father knew first because he got her the job. And here, well, it's nothing unusual, but here it's a surprise because after all, she didn't tell them anything. That's first of all, and secondly as well, Iwona had this habit that when she was leaving, she had some jewelry, some expensive jewelry. She feared the workers and was generally worried about being robbed or having her house broken into. So she usually hid those things in a wardrobe. She had a hiding spot in that wardrobe. And on top of that, she would tape up the whole wardrobe so that no one could get to it. Well, the parents knew about it. They knew she had this habit. They knew that she hid all those valuable things there. Well, this time it turned out that the wardrobe wasn't taped up. Maciek shows the wardrobe, shows that there are no things because she probably packed up. And indeed, many of those things are gone. Then the parents look at it completely logically. It looked like this. The mother knew what clothes, what dresses her daughter had, so she quickly realized that her daughter had taken them. It's November, she took some dresses more suitable for summer, and for example, she didn't take her winter shoes, which were in the hallway. She didn't take her coat, which was also for this time of year, meaning November or December, but she took things that are more suitable for summer. That was surprising too. In that closet, they also found her identification card and the keys to the apartment. Maciek himself said that he was surprised by all of this, that when he came back from training, because on November 10th, At the time when Iwona disappeared, it looked like this. Iwona was at home. There were also some workers in the house. He went out for training in the afternoon, took his bag, took his kimono, went to training, and came back around 10 post meridian and found the apartment door locked. Well, he was surprised, opened it with his own keys, but Iwona wasn't there when he left. There was also a handyman in the apartment who later, when questioned, said that he was indeed there until around 8 post meridian. Around 8 post meridian he said goodbye to Iwona. She was sitting in front of the fireplace at that time wearing a tracksuit. Well, nothing indicated that at least she didn't tell him that she was planning to go out again. So it was a bit strange, well, of course it was very strange that when Maciek came there were no signs of a break-in. The door was locked and the key was in the closet. Well, that was definitely something that had to be puzzling. Naturally, the parents' first thought was, their daughter didn't say anything, the closet isn't secured, there are keys, her identification card is there. Well, there really weren't many things missing, her passport was gone, and one more distinctive thing, the carpet from the living room disappeared. When the parents asked Maciek where the carpet went, he said that the workers probably stole it. When the parents found out about all this, they wanted to go to the police. But Maciek started to calm them down, telling them not to be silly, that after all, Iwona had gone to work in Germany. The fact that she didn't tell him, well, that's nothing unusual, that's just how she is, so they shouldn't make a fuss or go to the police, because it will all blow over. She only recently began working in television, and that could simply affect her career. Because if the owner of the television station finds out that she's still going to Germany for some side jobs, he'll just fire her. Well, her parents on one hand felt that something was wrong, but on the other hand, those arguments somehow convinced them, and in the end, they really let it go. They waited for some contact from their daughter, but they waited almost 10 days. On November 19th, they decided to notify the police, but on the other hand, they also notified the police after so many days. That was without any explanation. That was the 90s. The police were probably more focused on chasing the mafia, and it was also a time when there weren't many police experts. After that period of transformation, so it seems that the police didn't approach it the way they should have. In any case, well, no one showed up at that apartment. No one secured any evidence. There were some conversations with the worker, with the foreman, like I told you earlier, that he left around 8 post meridian, but basically nothing else. Maciek just said he came back home, but no other information could be obtained. You could see that the parents were disappointed. Iwona's father, a man experienced in the world, took matters into his own hands and went to Germany. He went to Mannheim to check if Iwona was there. When he got to the restaurant, the owner was surprised and said, "What do you mean Iwona isn't here? She was last here during the summer holidays." She said that Iwona wouldn't come anymore, that she simply didn't have the strength to work or handle everything. She said goodbye and they parted, likely for good as the owner expected. He also got a few more addresses from her where Iwona might be. The father checked all of that, but nothing came of it. When the father came back, he started his own investigation. He went back again. He went to Iwona's boss at the Italian television station, and the boss said to him, "Well, you know, on November 11th, someone called, and I thought it was you because I recognized your voice." An older man who said that Iwona had gone to work in Germany and that she was quitting her job at the television station. We were a bit surprised because she was really doing well. Her career was ahead of her, and suddenly she quit her job. They were disappointed, but since she made that decision, they thought she chose what was best for her. Her father was surprised because he hadn't called. And that was another thing that was a mystery in this case. It was probably hope. For the parents, it was Christmas of '92. They were just hoping that as long as she was there, she was there. Whether their daughter got upset or had an argument or wanted to be alone somewhere, still for Christmas, she would have to make contact. But nothing like that happened. There was simply no contact at all. They were already aware that something bad must have happened. Here, the police didn't really do much about the case, or at least it didn't seem like they did. I also have the impression that, well, it was as if something or someone was blocking the police back then. Because it's surprising that the police actually showed up at that apartment only 4 years later. The father, desperate, tried to explain it somehow. He had already determined that someone called the television station. He found out that she wasn't in Germany. He wanted to search the apartment thoroughly to see if there was any blood or any traces. He came to the apartment. Maciek was there at the time, and there was an argument between them because the father wanted to search the apartment, and then Maciek said that he lives there, he's registered there, and that was a shock for the father. Maciek even called the police. The police officers checked, and indeed Maciek was registered there. When he registered, who registered him? Because after all, the father knew he bought that house for his daughter. The daughter never said anything about registering Maciek. There was never even such an idea. So when did he manage to get registered? But as for the facts, first of all, the parents thought they were still married. Secondly, he's registered there, so he has rights to that house. He left that house. Maciek basically threw him out, and in fact, the father returned to that house. He could enter and could actually take action only a few years later in 1995, but that's a later story. For years, he couldn't really do anything in that apartment. That's how it was. On one hand, his daughter, well, something must have happened. It's impossible that she would break off contact like that. On the other hand, they saw that the police were doing very little. And as usual, of course, in such situations, what does the family do? Well, they go to psychics, and I have to say that in this case there were about 30 psychics involved. 30 psychics, each had their own theory, because those theories were senseless, but there were a few that were first checked by the father and later also by the police. We'll get back to those psychics later, but it also seems that Maciek also somehow went on the offensive. At the moment when Iwona's father reached out to Michał Fajbusiewicz, Michał started making several programs on the subject. They showed Iwona's photo, described everything, and of course, the way Maciek was presented in this context made it look like he knows. He is behind this disappearance. Even Iwona's and Maciek didn't like it. He turned to the court, filed a lawsuit to ban showing and publishing photos of his wife, that is Iwona. And here, well, it's strange, but the court actually agreed to it. So for this reason, the case was set aside for some time, for a few years. Problems started to arise, both for the show and for Michał, because that was the time when the chief of police stopped cooperating with Michał's show, saying that his programs weren't good. So that also caused the case to be set aside for a while. The father kept struggling all the time. That's why I would say there were so many psychics he turned to for some clues, and there were a whole lot of those clues. For example, there was one saying that Iwona was murdered by an older man while she was taking a bath, that her body was buried somewhere not far away, maybe on a plot or somewhere nearby. And here too there's a certain kind of thing. At some point the father actually takes an excavator and starts digging on that plot, and at a depth of about 2 meters he digs up a carpet. As you remember, the carpet disappeared from the living room. He finds items, claims them, shows them to police, and calls them personal belongings. Iwona's. Well, the police look at it shocked because it really seems that someone buried Iwona's things and buried the carpet. It turned out differently. One daughter, the other daughter, said that these aren't Iwona's things because she knows exactly what Iwona used to wear. And actually, that carpet isn't from the living room either. It's a completely different carpet. Of course, the father insisted that these were her things and that carpet, but even Iwona's own sister said that these weren't the right things. It looks like in the end it turned out that this lead was wrong. Well, the father is also still fighting in court all the time. In 1995, so 3 years after Iwona's disappearance, the court changed its decision about the publication ban. It allows the publication of Iwona's photo to show her face, which means that Iwona can still be searched for. And there's one more thing that came out at that time, which the parents also didn't know about, and that's Makik. In fact, he had no rights to that house because they were actually divorced. What I told you, that divorce they got in 1987, and then they just lived together, but without formalizing their relationship. Well, thanks to all of this, thanks to these arrangements, the search could start again, really, here. Iwona's father gets to work. He practically searches the house from top to bottom, doing everything he can to find any clues. But first of all, a few years have already passed. And secondly, he's not an expert, he's not a professional. He's doing it amateurly. The police aren't involved in any of this, so even if there were any traces, those traces could just as well have been erased or destroyed. Looking for traces on your own could have done more harm than good, but it's hard to blame him. A father has the right to do that. Since he didn't have any help from the police, he took matters into his own hands, just the way he knew how. The father is doing a great job, because he even brought archaeologists to that house who searched the house, every room, but they were archaeologists, not police officers. The fact is that at some point the police got very involved in the case. They started taking action. Later, even the Sulejowski reservoir was searched, because that was the indication of one of the psychics. Then another psychic said that the body was taken out and hidden somewhere in the Jewish cemetery. The father went to that Jewish cemetery and started searching, but when he started looking, it was difficult because it's hard to get into a grave. A lot of things like that, a lot of indications. Like I told you, 30 psychics, each one said something completely different. Some spoke logically about what could have been done then. Was done, but ultimately it was done too late. Looking at all of this, of course, we realize that Iwona is dead. If she were alive, sooner or later she would have made some contact. There would have been some trace. She wasn't the kind of person who would break off contact like that. A lot of things, of course, indicate that those who, or at least the one who was around her, knows more about this case. Obviously, but today we also have, I would say, a case that almost all of Poland is interested in, the disappearance of Beata Klimek. Well, I would say pretty much the same conclusions, but still, it doesn't move the case forward. A lot of things have been done. This case has been taken up and dropped 13 times. It keeps going on somewhere in some way. Even Iwona's father wrote a letter to the president asking for help. In the end, he accepted that she was gone and declared her dead in 2002. And in Łódź, he put up a monument for her. But somehow this case keeps coming back. For example, in 2007, Then there was another tip. There's a septic tank on Świetlikov Street, and someone said that Iwona's body was in that septic tank. They searched the tank for any burned body fragments. Of course, at first it was suspected that it might be Iwona's burned body, but then it turned out that it really was burned, but it was a dog's carcass. Here's another story from 2010. From Główno. It's a town not far from Łódź. There, a married couple bought a garage from another couple from Łódź. When they broke up the floor because they were doing some renovations there, it turned out there was a bag, and inside were human remains, the body of a woman. Of course, there was again a suspicion that these were Iwona's remains. DNA tests were done, and it turned out that these buried, or rather walled-in, remains belonged to a completely different woman. So this case is still ongoing in a way, and whenever new leads appear, the police try to revisit it. However, there is simply no evidence of what happened to Iwona. It's been 33 years since Iwona disappeared. There are probably still chances to solve this case. It can be done, definitely. The person who did this, well, he didn't have time for it. He killed Iwona. He just didn't have time to hide the body somewhere precisely. Well, the area is difficult because it's a recreational area, but presumably Iwona's body is somewhere there, not far from that house on Świetlikov Street. Well, of course, everyone says, well, Maciek must know something about this, but there are other possible versions. There were also workers there at the time, a few workers who came in and were doing renovations. It could have been that Iwona was in a tracksuit. She could have gone out, for example, for a walk or a run. She could have been hit by a car. Well, these are all plausible scenarios. To refute and say that such scenarios don't exist. I'm also a bit surprised in the context of this case that maybe a circumstantial trial should have been conducted, but those were times when such trials practically didn't exist in Poland. If there was no body, people would say, no body, no case. These trials just didn't happen. Today, such trials still occur occasionally. They're difficult to prove without a body, but it's possible. Perhaps the prosecutor's office should have decided back then to conduct such a circumstantial trial. To attempt one, what would happen? The result wasn't guaranteed, but they didn't do that either. Another thing is the sluggishness. That moment when Iwona disappeared, the first days, well, that was the time when this case simply had a chance to be solved. And so, we still don't know what happened to Iwona. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.
If you enjoy watching Crime Patrol, support our channel by clicking the support button or the link in the description below the video. We create new videos thanks to our supporters. Thank you.